Hey, it's Jim Hutchinson with the Fisherman magazine, and we are live from New York here at the studio with Tim Smith. Also have Mike Crusoe here in the room as well. Thanks for being here for this Thursday night webinar with the Fisherman magazine. As folks are just getting here, just do me a favor. We'll get an intro real quick as people. I know it's happy hour. Tim's got folks at the bar. They're going to come over, putting down their dinner utensils as well. Just real quick about myself and what we're talking about here. I am in New York today. New Jersey, Delaware Bay edition managing editor, of course. I started in New Jersey back in the early 2000s. By 2006, I was working from our headquarters out of Shirley here in Long Island. So I have had some experience fishing with some folks up here. And that's why some of the things we're going to talk about, I knew there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate with this. Talking with Toby Lipinski, our New England managing editor as well. And the biggest concern for a lot of folks is this new circle hook mandate from the ASMFC. So Tim and Mike are both here. The cool thing about this live webinar in this age of COVID is the fact that you can ask some of the questions you've got. And Tim and Mike are going to try to follow along with some of the questions. We'll go for about 45 minutes. And the whole thought was, when I started using circle hooks back in 2003, 2004, I will tell you that there was a little bit of a learning curve. I lost my fair share of fish over the years. And I think that's one of the things that Matt in Long Island and the guys here and Toby and I talked about. How are we going to eliminate that loss of fish as folks have to go towards this circle hook? So that's really what we're going to talk about. Fire off the questions. At the end, I'll try to follow up with some of them. And the real cool thing is we're working on the March edition of the Fisherman magazine. Any questions that maybe we can't answer here, we'll certainly track down those answers and see if we can't cover it in the March edition when we come back and visit this circle hook situation again. So really what I'd like to do is spend the first 5 minutes or so kind of getting to the point of why we're here, how we got here in terms of circle hooks, and maybe that could help contribute to some of the tactical discussion in making sure that we've got success with those circle hooks as well. So we're still good, right, gents? We are all good? The one thing that I want people to keep in mind is these circle hooks aren't necessarily anything new. The longliners in the commercial fishing industry, they've been using them for 20 years. It's a gear restriction that was designed to make sure that you've got the hookups and that you also reduce the mortality rate in those fish that have to be released. So that's one of the things that I really want to get into. But circle hooks aren't new before the commercial guys either. We're talking about 10,000 years. Some of the earliest artifacts found from fishing villages, going back to this one in Easter Island, they're circle hooks because the design allowed folks to put out their lines, put out their hooks, and leave them unattended to be able to go and let these hooks do their thing and catch the fish. So just making sure everything's good. Can you guys hear me? All good? All right, very good. So the perspective is your laptop muted? Bear with me 1 second. Should be. We're getting a little echo, so give me 30 seconds here. Close down your bar tab back there. Make sure that that's done. We good? So let's get into the situation where we are at this point as we work through these little details. It shouldn't come as a surprise. And I think that's part of the component that I was talking about before, that the commercial guys have had this for a long time. So now we have this gear restriction. The situation, it started with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So as we kind of ramp up with this, the ASMFC is a deliberative body which handles coastal waters, the states that share waters all along the Atlantic coast. Each state sends 3 delegates for that particular state. And folks always have this debate when we start talking about politics and fishing. Some folks say, I don't want to mix my politics with fishing. Well, it's not really up to us. If you think about the ASMFC in particular, those 3 delegates from each state, one of those people is going to be from the Division of Fish and Wildlife, or DNR, or DEC, whatever they call it in your state. That person is nonpartisan. That person is going to be a scientist for the most part. But you're also sending along the governor. The governor has a voice at that ASMFC meeting, typically sends the governor's appointee. And then a legislator in each of your states also has a voice. That legislator will send their proxy. So those 3 people get down there, and basically in any particular vote, striped bass, for example, these folks will caucus together. So you might have 3-0 in a particular state, or 2-1. If it's 2-1, then those two people are the majority, and that's the way these states vote. So I guess the point I'm making is appointees, it is political. But when you take a look at striped bass and managing the striped bass fishery inside 3 miles and being an anadromous species that spends part of its time in freshwater as well, the ASMFC has deliberated long and hard on the striped bass situation, which brings me to this particular screen. The blue in here is the spawning stock biomass. So the ASMFC is looking at the total population of striped bass. I'm 53, grew up fishing in Long Beach Island down in South Jersey. And when I was a kid growing up in the 80s, striped bass was a real hard species to catch. Not a lot of people did it. It was typically, in my growing up, it was for those Sharpies. And if you look at that trend, you look at those stock numbers from the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, those numbers back in the 80s were down very low. The population was low, and that big blue mass, that is your spawning stock biomass. Those are the big fish, the big breeding fish that are supposed to be in the biomass. That disappeared for the most part in the 80s. We rebuilt that fishery through some different challenges. The ASMFC came up with the regulations. But if you think back in the early 2000s where the fishery exploded, that's where that number came up, was so big. That's where we started talking about snag and drop. That's when we had the bunker populations come in. That's when everything really started getting groovy. But the point is, there is a downward trend in striped bass, and that is what has been addressed at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. I'm not saying that there's no problem with striped bass, because there certainly is, because there's a downtrend, and we've all seen that as fishermen all along the striper coast. But by the same pendulum swinging, I don't want anybody to think that we are in a collapse, because if you look at those numbers in the 80s, it was really terrible. So we're in a situation where the ASMFC and the fisheries managers are trying to figure out a way of bringing that striped bass population back up. That's why we have the regulatory change that happened in 2019, the 18% reduction across the board. Each state was able to enable their own 18% reduction. That's why we have subtle differences between some of the states. I know I'm from New Jersey, so a lot of folks out of New Jersey will look at our 28 to less than 38 and want to throw rocks at me. A lot of states are going with the 28 to less than 35. Delaware has something different. The Chesapeake has something different. So the fact of the matter is we have that regulatory change that took place in 2019, but the fisheries managers were also looking at the fact that we've got to do what we can to reduce the overall mortality. So let's bring up the circle hook discussion and why we have the circle hook in place now. This is a really interesting screen, because when we started going through this regulatory debate with striped bass, a lot of folks were saying, look, I release all my fish, so I'm not killing anything. So one side is pointing to the other guy, sort of like New Jersey versus New York, or Democrat, Republican. A lot of the catch and release only guys were saying, look, I'm not killing any fish. But if you look at this chart, 39% of the total dead fish for this particular year came from being harvested, that person who took a fish home or two fish home. 47% of the removals came from release mortality. So what is that? Well, that's for every 100 striped bass that you release, 9 of them are considered dead. That's a 9% mortality rate. That 9% mortality rate of a released fish is what led to those larger harvest numbers and led back to the ASMFC saying we've got to tackle the mortality rate. I've compiled a bunch of different studies over the years that the mortality rate with the typical J hook, the straight J hook that just kind of points and catches the fish, the flesh wherever it possibly can, that straight J hook, the mortality rate with those J hooks is anywhere from 9% to 18%. Yet when you look at the brand new circle hooks, with the points coming in a little bit perpendicular, where that point is faced into the shaft, the mortality rate with striped bass on circle hooks is anywhere from 1% to 6%. So let's think about that idea. If we've got a 9% overall mortality rate on striped bass as it is now, the thought is by going to the circle hook when using natural bait, if we can reduce that rate by 2 points, 3 points, if we can go from 9% down to 5 or 4%, we're going to be better off in total. That was the decision that ASMFC made that is now being faced by all of us who fish along the striper coast. Some states have already adopted quickly. I know in New Jersey, we had a circle hook regulation for years during the April and May spawn of striped bass up the Delaware River between Salem River and the Calhoun Street Bridge in Trenton. There's also a spawning stock biomass protection in the Chesapeake for years, that catch and release fishery down around the Susquehanna Flats. So this is something that is being put into place for all coastal waters, all waters where you're going to be hitting striped bass. But it brings up that thought of what we're going to do now in terms of striped bass. I'm going to leave you with one last thought because this is kind of important to kick into the discussion and gearing up. So this is where hopefully the questions and answers will come, and hopefully we can cover some of these, some of the topics. But it's nothing new. The ASMFC has been looking at circle hooks for striped bass since 2002. This is a white paper that's out. If you go to the ASMFC website, you can read about it and read about the challenges that they were talking about going back to 2003, the special report number 77. But specifically, as I go through this report, one of the things to me that kind of steps up as a glaring issue is the fact that we've got size differences in all hook sizes. I can tell Tim over here, I said, I suggest a 9.0 hook. If he goes into the shop, one 9.0 hook might look a little bit different than the other. Same thing, circle hooks. One of the discussions came out was inline versus offset. So this one's a slightly offset hook, but one of the things is that the ASMFC has defined that we need to go straight inline. This is inline. If I hold this to the camera, you should be able to see it. You can't even see the bend of the hook. This is a slightly offset hook. You can actually see that point comes away from the barb. This is off by maybe 5%. Some circle hooks in the past have been off by 15%. But to really make the mortality rate issue drop the way we want it, they have gone straight inline. It's the same thing for billfish. Tuna guys have known for years that circle hooks work really well because the fish comes up, takes the bait, and turns and burns. But I think the one situation we're going to get into is I can tell you to go get a certain hook. But at this point in the equation, if you're looking for certain tactics, you're looking to bait up a certain way, you fish on this in the surf, you fish in the sod banks. This guy's on a boat using clam belly. Not one circle hook is going to be the right particular choice for every application, for every bait. This was an article that we had in the Fisherman magazine. This photo is, and I just laid out some of the top 5, right? The Owner, Eagle Claw, Gammy, Mustad, and VMC. I put them up against the tape measure just to show that there are subtle differences between each hook style. Not just the upended eye versus the straight eye, but in terms of the length of shaft, the bend of the hook, the distance, the gap that's between that circle hook point and the shaft of the hook. This is one of the things I'm hoping the manufacturers will kind of catch up on at some point and start coming up with hook standards. But what I'm going to really suggest, because of these manufacturing differences, is don't just take my word for it. A lot of people are coming to this kicking and screaming. They don't want to use circle hooks. They've used them in the past, and like myself, had some failures in the past. We've got to adapt to this. But my suggestion is where you go to buy your bait this season, ask the shops. You know, if you're looking to re-rig, you're going to have to get all new tackle, right? Sometimes you're going to want a thinner gauge wire. You're going to want something that's thinner if you're fishing with clam baits, for example, or bloodworms, and you want to go with a thicker gauge when it comes to bunker. These are some of the things I want to talk about for getting these circle hooks to operate properly. Because for me personally, in New Jersey, as of Monday, we're 28 days away from striped bass season in New Jersey waters. And what happens is we've got a lot of holdover stripers in the rivers and creeks, the brackish rivers, same as up in New England as well. Talk to Toby about that. There are certain waters that he knows that are holding over some fish. But those holdovers that stay in those rivers throughout the winter months, by March 1st, that's when we're allowed to target those fish in the back. They lay down deep in the deep water. As the sun starts coming up a little bit higher, spending more time in the sky, especially if you think the sun is off to the southern exposure, the northern banks of rivers like the Mullica or the Toms or the Great Egg, those are the sides that are going to have the most sun at the most particular points of the day. You also have a subtle south wind blowing some of the surface area, the warmer surface water over. But if you think about muddy flats, right? Those mud flats where we're going to be fishing with these soft baits at the beginning of the season, they soak in the sun on low tide. Then as the water comes back in, it also warms up the water. So those areas along the northern banks are going to be the ones specifically where we're getting a little bit better action. But those early season stripers, a lot of the early holdovers that we catch are kind of a gold or bronze color because they've spent the winter significant time in those brackish waters. By the time, sometime in April, we'll start getting those sea run stripers. You can tell they're silvery, they've got the sea lice, but it's talking about specific tactics that our guys in Jersey use And I know that this is going to translate across South Shore of Long Island because I've seen guys fishing with clam in the surf throughout the summer months, also up the Hudson River as well. One of the things we've always done is fished with clam. Surf clam is really hard to find now. I'm sure anybody along the South Shore of Long Island would agree. We would get a bushel of clams sometimes for fishing a session on the boat in the early part of the spring, but surf clams are getting harder to find. But basically what we would do with a surf clam, and this is a traditional J hook, but it's all the same thing. We would use a twine to tie up that clam up the shaft. So what I would do is cut two pieces out of a clam, for example, run one point of the clam through the hook point, bring it up along the shaft, along the eye, and then bring the second piece along the hook. And what we use is just an elastic thread. This one's a little bit thicker one that I picked up my friend Frank at Gabriel Tackle. Ghost cotton is another one that you'll find in places. It looks like a little football, very thin line. What we would do is tie that clam up over the eye so that it has a natural presentation when it gets thrown out. Also, it holds that clam into place instead of falling down on the throat of the hook or on the bend of the hook. When you cast, it doesn't throw off. So we were using the elastic twine. And I think this is going to be a big consideration, especially this season, as guys start switching out those J hooks. It's a real simple fishery. It's a real simple rigging operation. You're just using a traditional high-low rig. Some guys might use the traditional three-way rig, but for the most part, those early season stripers are coming in a little bit more tepid. But instead of the J's, you're going to have to move over to circle hooks. So everybody that is clamming or worming along the surf throughout the summer is a guy from Long Island catching a striper on a traditional three-way rig. Now we're going to have to move over to the circle. So all of those baits are any natural bait. You're going to have to be using a circle hook. So wherever you go. As far as that discussion we had before about non-offset versus inline, I have a feeling it's going to be very hard to find any offset hooks anyway, because as everybody has been ramping up over the last 10 years, adhering to the billfish regulations, the shark regulations, everybody's gone to inline. So if you find an offset, it's probably in your tackle box someplace. But that's going to be the big thing, is rigging up those soft baits, and especially in that early part of the season. Now, for the most part, over the years with a standard J, we've used the bait holder hooks. And the typical bait holder style hook has those two barbs along the shaft. That's where, for example, with a bloodworm. Bloodworms are real popular in New Jersey. They're dug up in Maine. It's almost like a crime syndicate up there. I've talked to Toby. For all these bloodworms that come down from Maine, very few guys use bloodworms up in New England, except for the tubing worm. We'll talk about that. But bloodworms are a real popular bait down at the Jersey Shore throughout the winter months for perch and also for some of these striped bass. So basically, we would just take your standard J hook, take the wriggling bloodworm out of here, which is a nasty critter. You can see the little jaws coming up. And we just thread that bloodworm right up the shaft, come back around. And those barbs on that bait holder style rig is typically what would hold a bloodworm like this into place. So if you picture it, you've got a high-low rig. We'd have two worms hanging off just like that. And again, all that bait holder shank, or that shank on the bait holder, all that does is hold that bait into place. The problem is when you go out this week to try to find bait holder style circle hooks, you're going to have trouble. They're not up and in the markets just yet. I have spoken to the folks at Eagle Claw. They used to have one, and they're quickly trying to get back up to speed and get those circle hooks with the bait holder shank. They should be available sometime this spring. I'm not sure about the rest of them, but Gamakatsu and Mustad and Owner, VMC, all trying to retool some of the things that they're doing to catch up to speed with some of these things that we need. The problem, of course, as you think about it, is COVID-19 shut down a lot of manufacturing. So even though the folks at Eagle Claw have known for a while that we got to get back into the market with these bait holder style circle hooks, they've been held up at that point. But I am saying that Eagle Claw, you can look for those hooks sometime this spring. And what we're going to do a little bit is talk about a hack that you could do with your standard circle hook that you're finding now in the any place you're looking. For example, these Gamakatsus. I've got a Gamakatsu 7.0 hook right here. Perfect hook, thin wire gauge. Mentioned that before. If we're going to be using bloodworms, we're going to be using clams, go with a slightly thinner wire gauge. I think that's going to give you the benefit. You can see that circle hook design. But if you look at the screen now, with that bloodworm rigged the way it's supposed to be, we want that bloodworm to be stuck up there on that shank, right? We don't have those just yet. Here's a hack. That was a photo that Alan Riley, my friend, surfcaster down in New Jersey, had shared, but he had come up with a really cool hack for customizing some of these inline circle hooks that you might have that don't have the bait holder rig. It's available at thefisherman.com. You could just go to the search window and put improvise adapt. Improvise and adapt, and you'll find Alan's article, but it's pretty cool. Basically, all he's doing is he's taking that circle hook that he's got that doesn't have the shank. Well, let me do this one. This one's already rigged. It's definitely, I would recommend do it with one you've already got snelled, right? Because what we're going to do is once you snell that hook, you're going to just apply a little bit of crazy glue, Gorilla Glue, something right along that hook shank, and then coat it with sand, something gritty, some gritty material that you can put on there that will hold baits in place. So if you're not finding bait holder hooks, you're having problems getting the clams or bloodworms to adhere to that hook, they might slide down a little bit. Definitely a good idea to do something like that. Great hack that Alan had come up with. And he's the one that he does a lot of worming and clamming throughout the season. So that was something that he brought up, and I think that's a pretty cool idea. So that's a hack for you to give that a shot. Another hack that I've learned about from the guys who fish down on the Delaware River during that spring spawning closure. Got this one from Chris Orange. He actually uses something called a bloodworm bag. That's what he calls it. It's similar to the way people fish, I think, with salmon with the egg skein. But he would take a piece of tool that you can get at a craft shop, go to Michael's or something. It's just a light fabric, and then he uses some of that magic thread. But basically what Chris would do and some of these other guys, they would load the bloodworms inside that tool, wrap up that tool, and then just use some of that elastic thread to tie that bag onto the pretty much onto the bend of the circle hook. So that bag is just kind of hanging out. Another tip, and I know I've got some friends up on the Raritan who do this. If you're going to do something with a bag like that and bag baits, I'll tell you one thing that it really helps with. If you're fishing long pieces of bloodworm and there's a lot of perch, the white perch will terrorize a bloodworm. And if you know how much bloodworms cost at this point. So that's one of the reasons why guys were going to the toolie, or that tool. They were going with that bloodworm bag. But soak it with finessence. You can do, there's essence of bloodworm, of sandworm. I'm a big fan of the essence of cheddar crab. But you can also soak that bait bag, soak any of your baits in terms of getting them to work. One more thing I would leave you. I did talk to a bunch of people. I was trying to get some tips from friends of mine who've experienced this in the past. I was speaking to a friend of mine, Greg O'Connell, a good surfcaster. He was talking about sometimes what he'll do with the bloodworm, especially when it comes to a circle hook. I'll take this one. Is taking that circle hook and trying to really kind of wrap and weave a ball around that to try to kind of hold it on to the hook. So if that's kind of in a ball, obviously I haven't hooked that up, but you hook the worm and try to turn it into a ball, that will hold up a little bit better as well. Something you're going to find out though, for you guys that do a little bit of this fishing, whether it's along the South Shore of Long Island with clam and the surf throughout the summer months, or getting into that early season bite, just keep in mind that you're not going to have that traditional hook set. A lot of folks might dead stick and wait for the bite, and they get a couple of bites, get up there and try to jam the hook. The whole big thing with circle hooks, and I'm going to keep going over a couple of messages. Don't set the hook. You've heard that a million times, right? You've tried to use circle hooks and you're not getting it to work, and everybody says, oh, you can't set the hook. There's other reasons why you're going to be losing fish with circle hooks as well. I hope to cover those right now. But here's one tip that I was talking about with Greg. If you're going with a traditional high-low rig and maybe a pyramid sinker and casting out those bloodworms, and now you've got them on a circle hook, try to get away with the lightest possible weight you can. And here's the reason why. If you're using a heavy weight, you're using a heavy sinker because you like to get it out, the fish is going to come up on a short piece of dropper loop leader and take that bait and maybe turn and run. You don't want as much pressure. You don't want as much tension on the bottom with that weight because it might impede or spook the fish. So just go with enough sinker weight as you can to hold bottom. Also, when you're hooking with, I said the thinner wire gauge, lighter leaders too. Try to lighten up. One more tip that I would suggest as well. A lot of folks have moved over to braid because of the sensitivity, but some folks I talk to prefer to use mono in this situation, considering that mono has a little bit of stretch. So if you think about that, if it's sensitive to you feeling for those bites, it may be sensitive to the fish as well. So that mono on your main line may give you a little bit of added flexibility in terms of hooking that fish when it's turning and running with a piece of clam or worm. But again, like I said, a lot of the manufacturers, I hope to see more in the spring from some of the manufacturers in terms of what they're doing. But these are the pitfalls that we're going to have when it comes to baiting up this spring and using those soft baits. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the harder baits, and we'll refer back to some of this stuff as well because it's all very much related. But I talked to Chris Shoplock and the folks with VMC today. They've got a really cool rig coming out. It's called their VMC Bait Lock or B-Lock Bait Stopper. And I don't know if you can see this. You can certainly see it on the screen, but there is a little piece. This is a straight inline, non-offset hook, but there's a little piece of fluoro that is actually soldered or glued onto this hook. When I first got these, I was thinking, oh boy, this is a great bait holder rig. I love this. This hook is actually designed, and it's going to come in very important when we talk in a couple of minutes about live bunker. But what this little piece of fluoro pointing down towards the bend of the hook does is it keeps the live bait down here. So eels will not get wrapped up on the shank. They won't ride up the shank, especially important when you're live lining bunker. The bunker will not ride up. But the one thing that I've mentioned to VMC, I'm hoping they come through with this one because I think this is a cool hook design. If you took this and reversed the thread and now had the fluoro soldered to this facing up towards the eye, what I've got now is just what I was saying before. I've got that opportunity to thread that bloodworm on, and it's going to get held by that fluoro. So we'll see if that happens. But these are the things to consider, especially if you're trying to come up with different hacks in terms of making the circle hooks that you have work for your situation. Eel, something that comes up a lot. Folks talk about eels, live eels with striped bass. I switched over to circle hooks with live eels years ago. Never really had a problem with hooking up. We're going to talk about one of the biggest problems that folks have with hooking up with stripers on circle hooks, and that's how they present the bait on the hook and covering the throat and covering the gap. Eels don't do that, okay? Tim, can I borrow you for a second? I want you to take my eel here. I said it before, I think, but I'll say it again. The idea with circle hooks is slowly lift and reel, right? That standard hook set, I almost got you, didn't I? That standard hook set is not necessarily what's going to work. So what I'll do with eeling is I've got the conventional outfit, and I've got it in free spool the whole time. So we're drifting along. I feel a little nervousness in the eel. Now I could feel it running. Only a couple of seconds before I set, I almost wanted to set that hook. But now I'm just going to slowly lift and reel. At this point, if you feel that, I've got a nice fish. This is probably a 35-pounder. Could be 185-pound, I'm not sure. Once you feel that, you're buttoned up and you're ready to go. You just have to remember not to set that hook. All you're going to do is, I'm going to try to tighten the drag on this sucker. Oh, it's a nice rod, Tim. Nice Shimano rod there. Slowly lift and reel. Got to get out of that hook set. That's the big thing. One more thing I would tell you about this too is kind of laugh about this. Folks in the past, letting a striper run with a bunker for 30 seconds and then setting that hook, and that J hook is usually hooking them someplace down in the belly. And a lot of guys then start talking about, oh, you got to be real careful. Don't give them any slack. Listen, if that fish is hooked deep in the belly, you can give them all the slack in the world. You're not losing that fish. With the circle hook and the very design of the circle hook, with that perpendicular point, perpendicular to the shaft, it's heading in towards the shaft, the hook set is going to cause you to lose a fish. If you just slowly lift and reel as that fish is on, ideally the fish is going to get hooked in the jaw. It's going to get hooked in the cartilage in the lip. This is going to bring about a different way of fighting the fish, the way that we were always told to fight the fish. Because if you think about it, that circle hook is going to embed in the cartilage, but as it wears out, there's going to be a little hole that's formed in that cartilage. That's what's going to give you the opportunity to lose the fish. Because as that hole forms and it gets bigger and bigger, there's a chance that that hook and that barb is going to pull out. So now we're into a situation where if you're losing fish with a circle hook and you're screaming about it, I hate these things, you got to fight fish smarter. Because if that hole wears in the cartilage, you're going to be able to lose a fish a lot easier. So now we're back into the fact that I've already hooked up with that fish. I'm fighting that fish. No slack. Do not give that fish any slack. Reel as much as you possibly can, but if he's fighting and he's running, give him a little bit, but don't give him any slack. Once that slack is done, you're going to lose fish. So that's another component. Slowly lift and reel, and be sure that you're fighting that fish smart. And again, it comes down to what baits, what applications you're going to be applying. I said it before, and I'll say it again. I've lost a lot of fish making the switch over to circle hooks. And my goal here is I want a few people that are coming kicking and screaming to this to not lose fish. The important thing is, and I was talking to a couple of people about this. I mentioned this to Greg Kudnick at Fisherman's headquarters too. You got to step back and think about what you're doing. I don't want to make this rocket science, but the less fish you'll lose will come from thinking about the hook design and your application. Very simple by looking at this screen here. The hook anatomy. You've got the eye, you've got the shank, you've got the bend. You know all about that. But you got to consider the gap or the gape, and that's that line between the point and the shank. Some hooks are a little bit wider, some are a little bit less wide. You want to keep that space open, free, and clear. But especially what you want to keep clear of any bait impediment is that distance between the gap and the bend of the hook. That's the throat. You don't want to have the throat all covered with bait. In the past, some guys have said, I really want to hide the hook point from the striped bass. If you're trying to hide the point of your hook with a circle hook, you're going to lose fish, a lot of fish. You want that throat clear. Basically, if you're putting on a bunker chunk and you're covering up the entire throat all the way up to the gap, your chances of hooking up with a fish with a circle hook are much lessened. Now, I bring up this clam rig before too, because what we've always done is tied that clam up along the shank of the hook to try to make it flutter more and also to make it stay on the hook a little bit better. You'll notice that that throat is a little bit covered as well. But the thing I found with clam is it's a little bit softer bait. It doesn't always impede that turn and burn. Basically, this works best. The circle hook works best when the striper comes up, grabs the bait, turns and runs. And that's when the circle hook doesn't function like a jig, right? You're not trying to set it and grab a piece of flesh. What you want is that fish to turn. The fish, the bait and the hook actually pulls out of the striper's belly or wherever it was, and that little piece of point there is going to catch 9 times out of 10 right on the fish's lip. So that's why people say don't set the hook. Let the fish hook itself. Goes back to the first screen, tens of thousands of years. People set their lines and they forget it because the fish hook themselves with a circle hook. But it's very important not to cover up that throat, no matter how you're rigging your baits. Frank Crescitelli, we're out on the Northeast striped bass study with the guys from Fin Chasers, fishing out in front of the Statue of Liberty with a live bunker and a circle hook. And this one, we weren't drifting. We weren't live, drifting by a school. We had that on a fish finder rig, live bunker hooked right through the snout. Through the snout brings me to what is really going to be a concern in terms of live bunker, right? We've always talked about the snag and drop, those big snag rigs. Well, you can still snag baits in most states. Virginia, you can't snag baits. But every other state that I know of, North Mid-Atlantic states and up into the New England states as well, you can still, to this day, use that snag rig to snag your bunker. But the whole idea of snagging a bunker and then all of a sudden going into free spool and dropping that bunker on that snag hook, it's dead. Snag and drop is dead. What we're going to have to do is snag and re-rig, or if you've got your bunker in a live well. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the biggest thought is we move over into the bigger baits. I'm going for bigger hooks. I'm going to grab that tournament circle hook from VMC. This is a 7.0. Let's see what I got here. Bear with me a second. 6.0. Oh, there's a bigger one. This looks like an 8. So I'm going to go with a bigger hook, right? I'm going to be hooking with, rigging up my bunker. So obviously I'm going to go with a bigger hook. I'm going to go with a bigger gauge. Now, if you go back to that screen that I had before, you don't want to cover up that throat, right? You don't want to cover up that bait. So what we're going to have to do is do something unique with our rigging, especially when we're getting into live bunker heads, bunker chunks, because we don't want to cover up this whole throat. One of the things that folks have been doing for years is bridling baits. It started especially with the guys, the sailfish professionals down in the South Atlantic and off of Florida. They would use a bridling tool. I'll show you that in just a second. But bridling your baits will keep that throat clear. There's a great company here on Long Island It's called 3D Fishing Products. And Dean Delladonna has something called the Ultimate Bait Bridle. Very easy. You're going to look at this and you're going to say, Jim, this is stupid. I don't want to spend all my time rigging baits. It's really very easy, and these are really very simple. It's basically like a little dual lock, but it has a little piece of fabric. Not sure if you can see that. This little piece of fabric right at the point there, and that's where my hook's going to go. I'm telling you, this will take you 6 seconds to rig a bait, right? You've got a live bunker. You pull it out of the well. You grab one of these Ultimate Bait Bridles. Basically, you just unsnap it, take one end through the snout. I would go nostril to nostril. Dean actually tells me that he likes to go through the eye socket, but I'm just running it through, clip it at the other side. Brings up, I'm ready to go. I take my circle hook. Where's my rig going? Take one that's already snelled up. Now I'm just putting this through that little piece of fabric. Done. You see what I've done? Is now I've got that hook is so far away from being covered. There's no problem with that throat, with that gap, because I've got that circle hook now hooked up with that bunker all the way out front. Any way you hook your bunker. I know a lot of people rig them different ways, some through the snout, some through the eyeballs. A lot of folks like to go under the dorsal fin. A lot of times we'll hook them down near the anal vent as well. In fact, when we're live line and there's 3 or 4 of us on board, we each hook up a little bit differently to figure out which way they're biting. I've always liked going through the eye sockets or through the nostrils, because I'll put this on a traditional fish finder rig, right? Run your main line through that fish finder sleeve. I run my main line through that. Then I connect it to a barrel. And at the other end of the barrel, I've got my leader with my hook. So this way, I've got a little bit of play in this. And we're just drifting along, and that bait is now swimming just like that. But keeping that throat clear is best when you're bridling baits. And I'm telling you, you saw how easy that was. I'm telling you, it's 5 or 6 seconds to rig your baits. UltimateBaitBridle.com. You can check that out. The first time I really heard about people bridling baits was with Gary Caputi out of New Jersey. And Gary's been up and down the coast fishing with so many different people. And he was introduced to something called the quick rig. And this is something I know the sailfish guys used quite a bit. Comes with a set of pliers. Then you need all the accoutrements that goes with that, the little clip, and then you've got the barrel. Basically, what guys were doing is that they would run that little barrel through one end, out the other. It sits there right at that little nipple, and then grabbing the pliers, which is like a $40, $50 set right there. Then all of a sudden, he's got to clamp each one. So you got to do that. It takes a little bit more time. Quick rig was a great way of bridling baits, but again, twist ties. I know people have used twist ties going from one nostril out the other. But again, we said it before, choosing your tackle, choosing those hooks based on wire gauge and what you're doing, lightening up if you have to go with a lighter gauge, slowly lift and reel. But more times than anything else, guys are losing fish because they're not rigging properly. They're covering that throat, they're covering the gap, and you don't want to do that. That's why that bridling rig works so well. But again, everybody's got their own preference as far as rigging these bunker. Some guys will only go through the dorsal. It's surf guys. If you've snagged a bait in the surf in the past and brought it back and transferred it over to another hook, what was the best way? Usually through the anal vent, because that way you can throw it a little bit more. And also the one thing is we do is kind of guide it. You know, if we pulled the line this way, the fish would go this way. So you can always used to be able to just kind of guide the fish. That's one of the benefits too with a lot of guys I know like to hook the fish from the top, the dorsal fin, because as you pull it up, that fish is sometimes going down. The best part, of course, is those situations where all the bunker are up top and no bunker wants to go down. That's why I prefer to use the re-rig, go with the fish finder rig and a sinker and almost drift along like I'm fluke fishing. We're going to talk about bunker busting because I know everybody's like, I'm so upset I can't snag and drop. We're going to take care of that as well. But again, just as a reminder, all this stuff came from the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, this compact where all these states got together. The whole goal of this is to reduce the mortality rate of released stripers. We're at 9% right now. 9 out of every 100 stripers you might release during the season die. If we can get that down to 5, get that down to 4, that is the goal between this. But again, now we're talking bunker busting, right? When those bunker are up top and they're getting chased and the bunker are flying out of the water. And the most important thing was give me a snatch rig. I want to get that snag rig. I want to throw that out there. I want to hook a bunker and I want to drop it. No, now we're talking something different. We find those bunker schools that start this spring, carries on all the way through the fall. It's adrenaline, it's excitement, it's fantastic. but we're going to have to re-rig. We're going to have to snag, re-rig, and drop. And again, bunker, such an important part of the ecosystem. It's why all the bunker protections that have been put in place, the quotas on not just the bait guys, but Omega, but also New Jersey was back in 2000. We were able to, a bunch of political, I didn't do it. So many different activists were able to kick the reduction fleet, kick Omega protein out of coastal waters. That's where I started seeing in the mid 2000s when that striper stock was through the roof. And all of a sudden now we have bunker, we have whales, we have porpoises. It's a fantastic story. I highly recommend Dr. Bruce Franklin's book, The Most Important Fish in the Sea. That's where that name comes from when somebody talks about bunker protection, most important fish in the sea. But the most important thing I always thought about bunker is the way they feed. They start coming into our waters. We've had bunker in the Raritan Bay for much of the winter. We're still having these die-offs along the beaches. But really the big bodies of bunker start moving in late February into March. Now, we're not fishing active bunker schools then because the water's still cold and the bass are still a little bit lethargic. But those bunkers start arriving in our waters sometime in March. They're feeding, they swim in tight circles. That's part of their mating routine. It's also part of a defense mechanism. But if you think that every single menhaden or pogie, if you're up in New England, filters as much as 2 million gallons of water a year, it's phenomenal. Basically, they're eating dirty water and pooping clean water. That's why having more bunker is good for the entire ecosystem. But then we get back into the snag and drop. No, snag and drop into the live well. The first photo that I started with in the opening screen was a real favorite fish of mine. It was some 30-pound fish that I caught with Gary Caputi. It was about a dozen years ago, and this was probably when the light bulb finally went off with me with live line and with circle hooks. But Gary and I had gone out of Manasquan Inlet along the Jersey coast, and we had found these bunker schools, and we started snagging for the live well. We probably had 2 dozen bunker in the live well, and Gary said, let's go, we're heading out of here. Now, my thought was we were going to go chasing bunker schools, but we left the bunker schools to go up to Shrewsbury Rocks, where we put the circle hooks impaled right in front of the dorsal, dropped it right down, and we started instantly hooking up. There wasn't a single boat around. That's why I'm going to talk about not snag and drop, but snag and put them in a live well, because you're going to be better off the more bunker that you have in your live well, not just to fish those schools, but to go out and find other pieces of structure where the fish might be holding. So instead of having one heavy-duty spinning outfit with that Penn live liner reel that you're going to be snagging a bunker, going into free spool, no, we're going to move over to 2 setups. All right, you can still do that heavy-duty spinning outfit. I prefer braid on that one, and I'm going to tell you why. 30 to 50-pound braid on that spinning outfit down to a barrel swivel, a length of 30, 40-pound leader, whether it's mono or fluoro, up to you, and a tactical angler clip at the end. On that clip, I can put the snag rig, or at some point later on, I could take the snag rig off and take one of those pencils or metal lip swimmers or a pencil. We'll talk about that. The braid comes in real handy because I've seen people out there throwing that snag rig and then I'm going to jerk it through and keep jerking through the schools. It's really hard to catch bunker in that fashion, believe it or not. I like the braid because if you cast out to the bunker school and your line is tight, you just kind of let that braid come down. You feel that sensitivity. You can feel that snag rig starting to bounce on bunker, and then you can start feeling that vibration through. Then it's a quick stab, reel it back in, pop it in the live well. Get as many live bunker as you can, because you're going to have that second outfit that is set up same way as I talked about before. Main line through that fish finder rig, right? It's just an empty sleeve because that's where your sinker is going to go. You're running it through that fish finder sleeve. That's to your barrel and your leader off the side with your circle hook attached, just like you can see on the screen. The fish finder rig on the screen, you see it. I like having a conventional outfit with 20 to 25-pound mono, not the braid, because one, just like I said before, that little bit of extra stretch in the mono might be very helpful in terms of getting these circle hooks to do their thing. The other component is, I mentioned that too, if there's 3 or 4 of us fishing, and each one of us has our bunker rigged a different way, those bunker are swimming all over the place. Several of you are fishing on deck, and you don't have all those tangles. Now, when you're going out to chase those bunker schools, 2 outfits, one spinning outfit, ready to go with a snag rig or a plug, the other that conventional setup with the fish finder rig. Snag and drop, right? No, the big thing for all of us, I think, in the months ahead is all of us learning to throw a cast net. It's a great video Mike Caruso took of Dave Rooney while we were fishing one time. Watching somebody who knows how to throw a cast net, it's like watching a piece of art. Throwing that cast net, going back to what I said about Caputi, when you find that first bunker school out your inlet, right, and you throw a successful throw of the net, now you've got enough bunker in your live well to go do what you want. Everybody talks about the snag rig, but if you've got a live well full of bunker, you no longer have to think about securing your bait. One good throw, you're off, 15 minutes, and you're ready to fish wherever. Whether you're throwing those live bunker hooked with a circle hook in an exploding school of bunker, or you're going to go fish some structure. Cast nets, very important. I think I don't know how to throw one. I think we should make a dedicated effort. We'll all learn how to throw one, because I think that's going to be the one thing that really makes us better fishermen. I'm not sure where you might be down in the lower mid-Atlantic, or you're up in New England, but I know there's a couple of great net makers right out of Staten Island. The first guy, of course, was Percy Wentworth. Charlie Kay also learned from Percy. Those are two interesting guys, because if you buy a cast net from one of those guys, they won't even let you leave the yard unless you can prove that you know how to throw a cast net, which is pretty cool. So you get a quick lesson. Captain Frank Crescitelli, too, has always had those guide secret items. I saw Frank a couple of weeks ago. I asked if he was ramping up for cast nets, because I really do believe that a lot of folks are going to learn how to throw the cast nets. Tim and I were talking about it before. We get down to Florida. You see all the trolling motors on boats down in Florida on those light center consoles. And now we're seeing more of them in the Northeast, right? You get down to Florida, everybody knows how to throw a cast net, because they're catching pilchards and pinfish and all that stuff. We're going to learn the same thing. So let's start adapting some of those Florida tactics. Most center consoles now have that live well, so that you can go cast net or snag if you're still doing that, and throw them in the live well. If you don't have a live well, I highly recommend jury rigging one. All right, you can go out and buy a manufactured live well that has handles. You can bring it out onto the boat. We always had our Piney model growing up. Guys in South Jersey understand that, but we would just take a plastic barrel that would usually ice up a keg of beer with, bring that out with an aerator hooked up to a marine battery, and just fill that up with salt water and just add your live baits to that. If you don't have a live well on board, but you're heading out doing some striper fishing, especially if you're taking so much time, like I said, to prep your hooks and make sure that the gap's not covered, the throat's not covered, make a concerted effort to go out there and get enough live bait for you so that you can fish wherever you happen to be. And also you can travel along trying to find some of those hot schools, which is it's another consideration as well. You have all your bunker. They're in your onboard live well or one of these live wells that we just created on board. Always have one bunker hooked up, ready to go. Right, you have that one conventional outfit with the fish finder rig, whether you have a sinker weight on there or not. Hook one bunker, ready to go. Have it rigged. Drop them back in the live well so that you can go to the next location. And if you find that hot school or fish are busting up on top, at least you're going to be the one ready to go, because you've got a bait rigged and ready to throw it into the melee. But again, those are some of the things with that live lining. And again, we start seeing that. In May into June, the pogies arrive in New England, and everything is bedlam after that. More bunker in the water, the better. Just a couple of handling ideas as well. As you're considering all this stuff for us to reduce the mortality rate in striped bass, cradle those fish. It's one of the concerted efforts we've really had at the Fisherman magazine in the last couple of years. We're not showing too many of those straight up and down shots, right? And that was always ugly seeing one of those big fish hanging from the scale. But try not to lift those big fish up by their lips, and certainly don't put your hands up in their 30, we're letting go 40-inch fish, 38-inch fish, 44-inch fish. We're tagging them with gray fish tags, the green spaghetti tags. We're trying to track them for the future. Lift them up, cradle them, especially those big fish. Try to cradle them. Get that photo like that. That's what we want for the Fisherman magazine. We want those cradled shots, right? Send those along. Cradle those fish. Also, I see a lot of folks when they're trying to release a fish, they're sliding it back and forth, going back and forth. If you're letting a fish go, which I hope you're going to be letting a lot of these big fish go, just drop it in the water and let that fish just kind of go back and forth, right? I'm off the side of the boat, just like Irwin's doing right here. He's moving it back and forth, right? You want to get that water running across the gills, but don't go front and back. All right, go Go back and forth until that fish is ready to kick and swim off. Of course, if you want to put the boat in gear, just barely in gear, that's something to help you out as well. Another thing, getting back to the snag and drop. You're working those hot bunker schools. Don't always think that you got to throw it live bunker. One of the most exciting things for us is we'll chase those bunker schools and try to get stripers out of there using plastic shads or some of those metal lips or those pencil poppers. Right tools, right job. You find a hot school of bunker and the fish are all over them. I'll tell you what, just like Big Al's story, you can get them on the shads as well. I always enjoy fishing with Al. Al will catch a fish in a puddle of water and he'll catch you, outfish you anytime. Again, we're looking for those hot schools sometime this spring, and we'll see them again in the fall as well. But you know, when you see bunker flying out of the water, you know something's going on underneath, and that's when it just gets my adrenaline going and everything just gets fired up from there. So again, you don't have to think about snag and drop from here. One of the more exciting things too, especially as we're releasing a lot of these big fish, is get them with the artificials, right? Tim's got these beautiful plugs here, and when I leave his studio, this is probably going with me. The metal lips around, probably not that big, a nice metal lip swimming around the bunker school where you've got striped bass that are hot on their tails. Also those swim shads and the poppers, but especially the pencils. I heard a couple of friends complaining about this circle hook regulation because it's like when those fish come in over the bar, a nice offshore wind day and it's nice flat and calm, I'm not going to be able to get a lure out there. I want that snag rig because this thing goes a mile and I snag a bunker. Well, I'll tell you what goes a mile is the pencil popper. Pencil popper goes a mile. Tom Melton showed me how to start working those pencil poppers years ago out on Eastern Long Island. And when you've got those stripers piling on bunker, pencil popper's probably the way to go.
As well as on the retrieve. Make your cast and follow the plug. As soon as the plug hits the water, you want to take up the slack on your line, then get the line up between your thumb and your forefinger. What this is going to do is keep the line tight on your spool and not allow for bird's nests on later casts. Once the plug is in the water, you want to keep the rod pulsating at a very fast pace, but reel super slowly. What this does is keep the plug in the strike zone for as long a possible time. So again, just keep the plug working, keep it in the strike zone, nice and slow. When a fish does hit, don't strike until you feel the weight. When you feel the weight, boom, now you strike and you're in.
And really, that's not just from the surf either. That pencil popper works just as well around the boat when you've got those bunker schools. So it's really fantastic. Tommy was a much younger man, better looking at that point too. I mentioned before about holding those fish up. You get that big monster fish that you're going to let go, right? The boga grips are fine, but you really got to be careful. I think boga grips on a big fat fish, especially the ones when they're coming in for the spawn, loaded with eggs, it's really not good to keep that fish extended too much. If you've got a good fish and you're trying to figure it out, it's like, oh God, I really want to know how much this weighs. Take out the soft tape. Get that length and girth. Length times girth divided by 800. That's the IGFA formula. So you can get a good estimate on what that big fish weighs. Because again, all this discussion we're having is really about lowering the mortality rate in terms of released fish. The other thing I've really noticed that's been funny in this first season, this past season with the new limits, you don't hear many people talking about 40s and 50s anymore because they're not necessarily talking about pounders. We're talking about inchers. So I think maybe the new 50 is the new 50-inch fish. But again, you can go back to that measurement from the IGFA. Again, the most important considerations for a lot of you who've used circle hooks, it's probably a lot of it's old information, but people who are coming to the table kicking and screaming, they don't want to do this. There's just a couple of things to really keep in mind. First of all, match your gear to your bait and application. You really got to pay attention. That's where the folks at the tackle shop will help you. If you're going in and you're like, I'm going to be using bunker. Well, ask for some recommendations. You might like the Mustad. You might like the Owner, the Gamakatsu. The hook sizes. It's not always just, I need a 9.0 hook, because you might go up to the pegboard and say, this hook looks more to my style than this one. So there's going to be a slight variance in terms of the gap, the width of the gap in certain manufacturers and also the hook size. Just keep that in mind. Thin gauge, lighten up a little bit. When you're going to those heavier, like with live eels, if you're using smaller live eels, a thinner gauge hook is going to be fine. If you're going up in terms of large bunker or large snakes, maybe then you're going to be up along that 9.0 size model. Keep the hook gap clear of the throat open. Biggest thought. That is going to be the biggest reason for people losing fish is because they're burying the hook point. Don't do that. You want to leave that gap and that throat as open as possible. That's why I recommend bridling your baits when you get into those bigger baits that you're going to be using. And again, slowly lift and reel. It's really hard. I know that you're to get out of that mindset of the set, like the Bass Pros on Saturday afternoon on Sportsman's Channel, but really just start reeling, right? And once that rod tip is in the water, you know you've got the fish. And again, fight it smart. No slack in the line. You really want to be smart because you don't want to lose these fish until you're ready to release them the way you want. If you don't have circle hooks, I got an idea for you. I'll give you a pack. We'll give them to you. A sample pack from Gamakatsu. The Fisherman magazine is not just the video forecast. It's not just our online stuff. The Fisherman magazine been around since '66. So we're working with a lot of different partners. We're working with Gamakatsu and a couple of others with a subscription deal. It's $29.95 for the year. You get full access behind the firewall over there at thefisherman.com, but we'll send you a package of Gamakatsu hooks, and that should help get you all geared up for the season ahead. So like I said, I'm just excited because where I am now back in New Jersey, as of Monday, the 28-day countdown is on for those back-based stripers, and we will be looking for worming and clamming. And of course, we'll be looking for those circle hooks as well. I know we're probably getting a few questions coming through, and my lovely assistant, Tim, could probably help me with that. But I know the one thing that we've been getting a lot of questions about, and it's been a terror trying to get some answers. This is something that the state of New Jersey just posted last week, and it's answering a lot of the questions a lot of people have. It may be different in your state, but this is kind of like in my opinion, it's kind of an opening salvo in terms of how they're going to address this stuff. Circle hooks. If you're fishing for striped bass with natural baits, you have to use circle hooks. Well, what if I'm fishing for bluefish? No, if you're fishing for striped bass. Well, what if I'm fishing live eels for cobia? No, if you're fishing for striped bass. Look, if you're in a situation where you're fishing for bluefish and you've caught your 5th or 6th striped bass, you're probably no longer fishing for bluefish. And if you're in a situation where you're catching a lot of striped bass, move over to the circle hook. Because again, the idea here is we're trying to reduce the mortality. Animal products, pork rind, is that a natural bait? Well, according to New Jersey, yes. So if you're going to put a pork rind on a bucktail jig on the hook point, it's got to be a circle hook. Good luck finding a circle hook bucktail. But if you're using otter tail, that's not natural, right? So if you're using a synthetic, if you're using gulp, you're okay. What about the deer hair? Somebody asked that. Well, in New Jersey, they're saying, no, that's not part of the hook. It's not part of the hook point. So deer hair, that doesn't make the bucktail any much of a problem. They didn't answer as far as eel skin plug, but I guess in New Jersey, if the eel skin's not covering a hook point, there's all these questions, right? I think all states are going to be forced to answer this. And maybe New Jersey abridges theirs. Maybe New York comes up with theirs. But one big thought is next week, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission will meet again. On Wednesday, they've got striped bass on the docket again. And they're going to be bringing up some thoughts. One of the biggest thoughts it started in New England. I know the folks up there very concerned about this. Connecticut Party and Charter Boat, the Rhode Island guys, all the way up to Stellwagen in Maine as well. There was a letter that was sent to the ASMFC just a few weeks ago that included names all the way from Maine down to the Beach Haven Fishing Association in South Jersey to ask about certain variances, in particular, tube and worm. We talked about that. Told you about rigging bloodworms the way we do in New Jersey, but it's very popular for guys, especially trolling on a kayak in New England, to use a live worm on the end of their artificial tube. So what about that? I'm hoping that Wednesday we're going to get some more answers to some of those questions, some of the other questions, perhaps the eel skin and stuff like that. And of course, you're going to be in this situation where people are going to ask this question a million times. Well, I wasn't fishing for striped bass, because that's the email I'm getting a lot. Well, what if I'm fishing? Well, let me put it this way. If you're outside of 3 miles and you're dragging a mojo, you're probably not fishing for bluefish. So the same enforcement questions that are going to be asked of you folks out there that are chasing bluefish outside of 3 miles, they're going to be asked inside as well. I don't know how quickly enforcement's going to get caught up, but again, it gets back to the original discussion. The whole premise of this thing was to reduce the release mortality, to get that mortality rate from 9 down to 6, down to 5. So it's something we're going to be covering a lot at the Fisherman magazine. And hopefully we can pick up a couple of questions here if we've got them. Because one of the things, ask for, yeah, Tim, yell it out. Ask for questions?
Time for questions.
Tim, baby boy, thank you very much. Tim just asked me if we fire off those questions on YouTube. Let's go over to that. My daughter, Samantha here. Let's go back over. Give me a second while I find that post. But that's one of the things as we start getting some of these questions regarding striped bass, maybe tonight that I can't answer, and it's possible. A couple of things I don't know very much about, and that's fishing and women, but I keep trying. Don't I, honey? Let's see if I can find some of these questions here. They're popping up. I'm seeing them pop up. Hold on a second. So you're firing off these questions. I'm trying to wade through here and figure this stuff out. Let's see what we've got. Rig deals. Hey, we just talked about that. I've destroyed. Use circle hooks, eel, boulder, finally the found. Didn't set the hook. I'm going to try to read through this. This is going to be drag setting. That's an interesting question. Hawaiian Dan. Yeah, you know what? That's one concern as well, and it's especially going to hit into those bankside anglers who are like the clam guys. You're fishing with clam or bloodworms. Yeah, you want to lighten the drag. When you talk about using circle hooks on that traditional high-low rig or maybe the traditional three-way in the surf, definitely lighten your drag. Typically, you'd want a tight drag so when fish hit that, it's gonna hook the fish. We're getting to a point where we want to let that fish run. So that's the one thing I said is lighten up your sinkers when you're fishing from shore. Go with the lightest you possibly can. If you're using some of those smaller or slimmer baits like bloodworms or clams, go with a lighter gauge hook. But again, lighten everything up. Lighter leader, lighter line. But Dan, you've got a good point. I would go with certainly a looser drag so you don't have too much a problem with tipping yourself off the keying in the striper is what I'm trying to say. Somebody mentioned a rod holder. I had that picture of my daughter up. I had taken her, she was 9 at the time. I took her striper and black drum fishing in a place that I regularly frequented. We'd find these black drum. They'd come in at the same time as these smooth dogfish. They were pretty big fish, 5 to 8 pounds. But what I would do is set up a conventional outfit on both sides. One on each gun, one on the port and one on the starboard. Put them in there. Traditional fish finder, hook a clam belly, and when we're fishing clam belly from the boat, we don't have to tie it on. It can just sit right there at the throat of the hook. It's fine. I would leave it open, free spool, but put the clicker on. So I put both outfits out and let Rodney hook the fish, right? Rodney, the rod holder. So what I told Samantha when she was 9 is if that clicker goes off on either one of those rods, I want you to pick up and just start reeling. That's it. So she was just in tune. When the clicker went off, she grabbed it and started reeling. I said, it's got to be quick. You got to move in. So when that clicker would go off, the first fish she caught was a smooth dogfish, started bleeding. I took the barbs off. I said, I'm going to take the barbs off, but you're never going to see blood again, but you might lose fish. She never lost a fish. She kept doing that same thing because we let Rodney hook the fish. I think it was like her 12th or 13th fish was a 15-pound black drum. Took that and went home. It was great. But again, old dogs, new tricks. Samantha had never fished that way before. So it was easy to let her figure that out. But again, let Rodney hook the fish whenever possible, because that's the way that circle hook really works.
A couple questions on do lures require circle hooks?
Again, getting back to that, the decision by the ASMFC was natural baits. So no lures need to have them, except for the tube and worm. And the reason I said that, the tube is an artificial. You don't need to have a circle hook. But once you introduce that sandworm or that bloodworm to it, now you're applying a natural bait. So it's going to be any natural baits that are employed. That was why I said something about the pork rind. Pork rind is considered a natural bait. So put a pork rind on a bucktail, now you're in jeopardy. But if you use an ottertail or synthetic or gulp, you're okay. So again, that lure question is only that's only applicable to those natural baits, as I said. What else do we have here?
We need some more questions. Last call for questions. Get it out there.
Bridles, great fishery, demands yes. A lot of guys talking about their home waters. If anybody's got GPS numbers of certain areas, you can put them right there on the screen. I'll keep them quiet. I will not tell anybody. Or a parking area near the canal where I can, It's the last thing you need is another Jersey guy coming up to New England to fish the canal, right? No, the only other thing as far as the artificials, I've noticed that Rapala, a lot of the Rapala lures are coming with that inline, that straight hook, as opposed to the treble. So I know Toby Lipinski's one. He's been swapping out a lot of his hooks for the inline as opposed to those trebles. So that's something to consider. It's not mandatory, but that's something that you might want to think about. Is I take down the barbs when I'm surf fishing, and it's really only because I'm a coward. I don't want to hook myself. I've hooked myself before. I just don't want to deal with the barb. The other thing is when you start getting piled up on bluefish and have bluefishes and you've got all these trebles. So I take down the barb, but there are some things that you should probably consider in terms of your artificials to try to help with that release concept. So that's definitely a thought as well. Bucktail teasers, do they require circle hooks? No, because I can't answer for every state. Again, we're going to find out more, I hope, next Wednesday when the ASMFC gets together. But I'm going to say no for the most part because you're not putting the hair on the hook point. It's on the shaft. So I think that's where that gray area that helps us out is going to be. But again, Toby's he's writing the article up. We'll send that out via email. Hopefully you're all signed up for our email alerts at thefisherman.com. But we're going to be putting out the agenda items on Monday for the ASMFC meeting so that you'll know what's going on. But again, we're hoping to find out a little bit of clarity on Wednesday when ASMFC gets together. So perhaps we can find more about any type of exemptions, tube and worm. What are they talking? Bucktails, eel skin plugs. Maybe everything will be covered. But got to thank those guys who wrote that letter that raised that question as well. Anything else? Anything else popping up that I'm missing? Yeah.
Yeah, last call for questions before we wrap it up.
Last call for questions. Happy hour's almost closed, so I got to head back over there as well. No, seriously, if you got anything else, fire it off. You can also reach me. Folks know that you can just go to info@thefisherman.com. So if you've got any follow-up questions, send them to info@thefisherman.com. We'll do our best to try to answer them at another point. But again, I would encourage you to pick up the Fisherman magazine. The February edition, we start getting into some of these questions that Matt has been getting here on Long Island, that Toby gets in New England, that I've gotten in New Jersey. So that's the first. But March, we're going to cover more in terms of circle hooks and rigging. So pick that up, and I'm sure we're going to continue this through April as well. Just put gulp worm on the tube. There you go. Gulp sandworm. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I missed it earlier when you were talking about it. You're allowed to snag the bait. You're allowed to snag bait, put it in your live well, but you can't snag and drop.
Cannot snag and drop.
Can snag.
Well, that's something, I mentioned that before. Virginia has a rule. They've had it on the books for a long time that you cannot snag baits down in Virginia. So there's one state that already has that policy. Will other states follow? I don't know. At this point, I don't know of any other states, especially for those of us in the Northeast, that have a snatch rig prohibition. It's just that you've got to snag that bait and get it back to the boat, re-rig it, put it in a live well, and keep snagging baits. But no more snag and drop. It's dead.
Many times as you're bringing that bait in, you get picked up, so you're out of compliance, and you have no control over that.
Yeah. If you're actively fishing that bunker and there's an enforcement officer there looking, he's going to know. So it's going to happen. It's certainly going to happen. But again, you've got the spirit and intent of a law. There's the letter of the law and the spirit and intent. And just keep in mind, the spirit and intent of this law, this regulation, is to reduce the mortality rate on stripers that we're releasing. And now that we're releasing all of those 40-inch fish to continue to swim again, we want to do as much as we possibly can to ensure that the mortality rate goes down so that we're releasing healthy fish. And that's why we're doing those circle hooks. That's why I mentioned cradling the fish. All these things are meant, the spirit and intent is to reduce the mortality rate on these striped bass. And I think that's going to be the most important thing to keep in mind. So if you want to find loopholes, by all means, find loopholes. Just trying to address some of the situations and trying to make this work a little bit better for all of us. And again, I've certainly lost my fair share of fish, and I think you will as well. What's that? Back to open? Back to open. We're going to go back. Folks, I'm going to leave you with that favorite fish of mine from That was at the Shrewsbury Rocks. But thank you very much. Send those questions to info@thefisherman.com. We will be our very best to either answer your question directly or include it in one of our upcoming editions of the Fisherman magazine. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Stay warm.